Some people are born to be loved, and others are born to endure. Sammy Kershaw belongs to the latter, the man who once set Nashville on fire, who once stood beneath the bright lights of the Grand Ole Opry, now finds himself alone in an old Louisiana bar, singing to a few quiet souls, and to the memories that never quite healed. His voice was once called the last breath of traditional country, husky, warm, and so real it could stop a room cold. But behind those chart-topping hits that once captivated America lies a life marked by hardship, a father's death, a childhood in poverty, addiction, broken marriages, and countless nights swallowed by silence. He once had it all, then lost it all. Once praised by Nashville, then forgotten by it. And yet, even when the lights went out, he kept singing. Not to be heard, but to prove that sometimes music is the last way a person can stay alive. And to understand why his voice carries such weight, we must go back to where it all began. Kaplan, Louisiana, where a fatherless boy sang his first song, not to dream, but simply to survive. Kaplan, Louisiana, the 1960s. A small Cajun town in the flatlands of the South, where summers hung thick with the smell of mud and winters sank into fog and the endless hum of crickets. Here, children grew up with the sound of frogs and sugarcane fields, not with stages or spotlights, and certainly no dreams of Nashville. On February 24, 1958, Samuel Paul Kershaw was born into a poor working-class family. Their small wooden house stood on the edge of a swamp, just a few miles down the dirt road that led to town. His father, Edward Kershaw, was a hard-working man who loved country music and could play the guitar. But when Sammy was just 11, Edward died suddenly. That loss split his childhood in two, leaving a hollow space that would never be filled. His mother, Louise Kershaw, carried the burden of raising her children through poverty. She taught Sammy to be strong, but she couldn't teach him how to stop feeling lonely. At night, in that small house lit only by a kerosene lamp, the boy would turn on an old radio and listen to the voices shaking America at the time. George Jones, Conway Twitty, Merle Haggard, Johnny Cash. Their voices were rough, honest, and aching, enough to make a 12-year-old boy cry. That night, he learned something that would define his life. If you hurt, turn the hurt into a song. In 1969, at just 11 years old, Sammy began singing in local bars around Kaplan and Abbeville. A small, skinny kid standing among drunk strangers, his voice young but full of emotion. They'd toss a few coins on the table, and Sammy would bow his head and keep singing. Not out of passion, but because every song could buy dinner for the family. In the early 1970s, while other boys dreamed of being baseball players or hunters, Sammy dreamed of having enough money to buy a new guitar. His father's old one, scarred and out of tune, remained his only friend. When the bars closed, he'd stay behind, plucking clumsy chords, imagining a bigger stage, one where people would listen, not out of pity, but because they understood. By 1975, the 17-year-old boy didn't yet know that those foggy nights in Kaplan were forging the soul of country music in his blood. Raw, real, soaked in the scent of earth, whiskey, and the sorrow of the American South. Then fate began to move. Those songs on the radio would soon carry him beyond Kaplan, across Louisiana, and eventually to Nashville, where the dream would begin and tragedy would be waiting. In 1977, at just 19, Sammy Kershaw left Kaplan with his father's old guitar and a few shirts folded into a small suitcase. He drove down Louisiana's red dirt roads, playing wherever someone would pay a few dollars. Bars, fairs, weddings, roadside joints. It was the era when country music was still raw and smoky, where whiskey filled the air and a voice that came from the heart could silence a whole room. But to earn those claps and smiles, Sammy paid a heavier price. Long drives, nights spent sleeping in his truck, meals of cold sandwiches and black coffee, that life slowly devoured his youth. The dream of Nashville, so far away, began to fade into something distant and fragile, buried under bills and loneliness. By the early 1980s, he was playing guitar for local bands across South Louisiana and Texas. The name Sammy Kershaw was still small, but the voice, that rough, soulful, aching voice, made people stop and listen. Yet along with the music came darker things. Bottles of whiskey, painkillers, and the kind of exhaustion that seeps into your bones. He would later say in an interview, "When you're poor, you drink to forget you're hungry. When you're famous, you drink to forget you were ever poor." By 1985, the struggle reached its breaking point. Gigs dried up, money ran out, and his first marriage fell apart. Sammy left the stage and took a job at a supermarket in Lafayette just to feed his kids. At night, he still sang, not for an audience, but for himself. Inside a small, empty house, echoing with silence. It felt like the end of everything. But fate, as always, has a strange way of returning to those who never stop singing. A demo tape he had recorded years earlier in a bar. Rough, raw, and heartbreakingly honest, found its way into the hands of someone at Mercury Records. That voice made them stop. They reached out to him. And within months, Sammy's life changed direction. In 1990, he was invited to Nashville for the very first time. Standing in the City of Legends, George Jones, Conway Twitty, Alan Jackson, he was overcome with emotion. Looking out at the lights, he whispered, "I came late, but I made it." It was the beginning of a new chapter, a journey from the darkness of Louisiana to the bright lights of Nashville, where a man who once thought he'd lost everything was about to rewrite his destiny with nothing but his voice. In 1991, Nashville changed forever. A man from Kaplan, poor, quiet, and with none of the looks of a star, walked into the studio at Mercury Records. No one expected much, but the moment he began to sing Cadillac Style, everything stopped. That voice, rough, warm, and raw, sounded as if it came straight from the red soil of the American South. People whispered, "That's the kind of country Nashville's been forgetting." Just months later, his debut album, Don't Go Near the Water, was released. It went platinum, catapulting Sammy Kershaw from a nobody to one of the most played voices on country radio. He carried the spirit of honky-tonk into an era obsessed with commercial polish. Audiences loved him for his authenticity. Producers feared him for that very same reason. Then came 1993 and his second album, Haunted Heart. It was the brightest chapter of his life. She Don't Know She's Beautiful shot straight to #1 on Billboard, becoming his biggest hit and opening the door to a string of successes. Queen of My Double-Wide Trailer, Haunted Heart, I Can't Reach Her Anymore. The name Sammy Kershaw spread across America. From the smoky bars of Louisiana, he now stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry, a place that once existed only in his childhood dreams. But Nashville is never just light. The higher you climb, the thinner the air becomes. Endless shows, interviews, and flights drained him completely. Whiskey returned, not to forget hunger this time, but to forget himself. Behind the laughter were eyes that never truly smiled. Even at his peak, there was a sadness in him no one could name. In 1994, he released Feelin' Good Train, featuring third-rate romance and Southbound. His music still burned bright, but inside, the flame was changing color. Each time he stepped on stage, he felt a little further from the man who once sang to survive. Amid the charts, awards, and tours, he began to wonder, am I still singing? Or just playing the lead role in someone else's dream? By 1996, with the release of Politics, Religion, and Her, Sammy Kershaw had sold millions of records and become one of country music's defining voices of the 1990s. But just then, the first cracks began to show. His marriage was falling apart, his health was declining, and depression crept quietly behind the curtain. He later confessed, "The louder the applause got, the emptier I felt inside." The bright lights of Nashville couldn't save that soul. They only shone brighter, to reveal the growing darkness within. Nashville, late 1990s. The lights of the stage blazed, glasses overflowed, music thundered. But in the shadowed corner of a recording studio, Sammy Kershaw sat alone, staring at his own reflection. The man once hailed as the last breath of traditional country now saw only a weary face, red eyes, and trembling hands, the toll of whiskey and years. And then, Lorrie Morgan walked into his life, a sudden beam of light in the darkness. She was beautiful, sharp, tender, and carried her own wounds, as deep as his. Two lonely souls found each other, and for a while, it felt like salvation. They laughed, they sang, they drank. They held each other in the middle of Nashville nights, believing, if only for a moment, that love could save them both. In 2001, they married. Nashville called them the golden couple of country music. Two stars, two voices, two broken hearts standing together on stage. When they sang "He Drinks Tequila," the audience rose to its feet and cheered. But behind those bright lights were shadows no one else could see. Life together quickly became a battlefield. Both carried unhealed scars, and when two damaged souls collide, they don't heal each other, they shatter further. Arguments, jealousy, rumors, debt, headlines. Every time they stepped on stage, they had to smile, while everything inside was falling apart. Sammy drank more. Lorrie cried more. The press called them the Storm of Nashville, a tempest that refused to calm. In 2004, they separated, then came back together, then broke apart again, then tried once more. A love that couldn't live, yet couldn't die. By 2007, it was over. A bitter public divorce, full of tears and accusations. Nashville fell silent, and Sammy, the man who once sang about love, sat alone in an empty house, staring at their wedding photo and whispering, "I lost her, and I lost myself." After the divorce, he went bankrupt, lost his home, his reputation, and his faith in music. For years, Sammy Kershaw disappeared. No concerts, no interviews, no new songs. Occasionally, someone would say they'd seen him back in Louisiana. A bearded man sitting by a glass of whiskey, watching the sunset over the sugarcane fields in silence. To him, Lorrie Morgan wasn't just love. She was the final wound, the one that extinguished one of Nashville's brightest flames, leaving behind only ashes and a voice that now trembled like a prayer for forgiveness. I don't blame anyone. Maybe God brought us together to teach me that not every love is meant to last. That love ended. But from its wreckage, a new version of Sammy Kershaw began to emerge. Older, quieter, more wounded, and more real than ever before. After the bitter public divorce from Lorrie Morgan, Nashville quietly closed its doors. No more phone calls, no more concert invitations. Only silence. A silence so deep you could hear the clock ticking in the empty house. Sammy Kershaw vanished from the country music radar. People said he'd fallen apart, that he drank himself into oblivion. But in truth, he was simply learning how to breathe again. Louisiana, the land that raised him, opened its arms once more. Amid the rice fields, bayous, and southern humidity, he began a new journey, not as a singer, but as a citizen. In 2007, he announced his candidacy for Lieutenant Governor of Louisiana. Nashville was stunned. The man who had once sold millions of records now stood outside the spotlight, talking about education, jobs, working families, and faith. He drove himself from Baton Rouge to Lafayette, town to town, shaking hands, speaking face to face. No grand speeches, just the raw honesty of a man who had known hardship. I'm not a politician. I'm a Louisiana man, and I just want to do something good for the place that made me who I am. He didn't win, but he moved thousands of people. The same man who once stood under Nashville's bright lights was now standing on courthouse steps with the same voice, the same truth, only this time, without the spotlight. 3 years later, in 2010, he ran again, and again, he lost. But this time he smiled, because for the first time in years, he felt alive for something greater than music. When reporters asked if he regretted it, Sammy simply said, "I used to sing for audiences across America. Now, I just want to talk to people who are struggling. The poor, the lonely, the forgotten. Because I understand them, I used to be them." After 2 failed campaigns, he returned to Kaplan. No more fame, but no more fear either. The Louisiana afternoons were warm and quiet. He'd sit on his porch, pour a cup of coffee, and watch the sunset over the sugarcane fields, a soft, golden light. Not loud, not blinding, but bright enough to reflect all the years behind him. Sometimes failure doesn't destroy a man. It simply forces him to live honestly. Nashville had forgotten his name, but Louisiana hadn't. Among the sugarcane fields, where the air still carried that bittersweet scent of southern sunlight, people still remembered Sammy Kershaw, the warm, raspy voice that once made them cry. After years of political defeat and emotional exhaustion, he returned to the only place that had ever truly understood him: music. No fancy studios, no big record labels, just a man, a guitar, and wounds that had never fully healed. In 2010, he released the album Better Than I Used to Be. The title itself sounded like a confession, not the best, just better than before. In that deeper, heavier voice, listeners could hear every scar of his journey, a man who had been broken, yet still knew how to love, to sing, and to be grateful. "I'm not singing to get back on the charts," he said. "I sing because I'm still alive." The song never hit Billboard, but it reached thousands of hearts. Those who had lost, who had fallen, who had stood on the edge. They saw themselves in the voice of Sammy Kershaw. Then came 2014, and Do You Know Me, a tribute to George Jones. It was his heartfelt tribute to the man who had shaped both his voice and his life. Every note of that album felt like a prayer to Nashville itself. Thank you for teaching me to sing honestly. When he sang, "He stopped loving her today," he didn't try to imitate George Jones. He just sang with what was left in his soul, a trembling, truthful sound soaked in loneliness. That night, in a small Louisiana theater, the crowd stood and applauded. Not because he was a star, but because they knew they were witnessing a soul return from the ashes. From 2011 to 2015, Sammy Kershaw toured again across the South. County fairs, small-town theaters, intimate shows without fireworks, just genuine applause and the hum of steel guitars. His voice no longer carried the youthful strength it once did, but it had gained something far deeper: emotion. Each song, Vidalia, Love of My Life, Haunted Heart, sounded like a reflection of his own life, a long road through loss, toward a fragile kind of happiness. He no longer needed chart toppers. He no longer needed fame. He just needed to sing and to see a few people still wipe away tears when he did. Because in the end, that was the truest kind of comeback. When a man no longer sings to be loved, but sings because at last he has learned to forgive himself. When the lights of Nashville have dimmed, when the applause exists only as an echo in memory, what people remember about Sammy Kershaw isn't the chart positions. It's his truth. In a music world drifting far from its roots, he became a symbol of the simple, honest beauty of traditional country. Since the early 1990s, he helped revive the neo-traditional country sound, bringing audiences back to the raw spirit of the South, where steel guitars, fiddles, and that warm, raspy voice told stories of love, loss, and faith. Generations of artists, from Tracy Lawrence, Mark Chestnut, Joe Diffie, and Brad Paisley to Chris Stapleton, have all felt the influence of how he sang, how he told stories not to the camera, but to the heart of the listener. They said, "Sammy never tried to be country. He is country, pure, rough-edged, and full of soul. But his legacy goes beyond the music. It lives in the quiet things he did off stage." For years, Sammy Kershaw supported community efforts like Farm Aid, raising money for struggling farmers across the South. He worked on education initiatives, especially the children's program, Cajun Kids, encouraging Louisiana's youth to preserve the Cajun language and heritage. And in the divided climate of the 2010s, as America fought over politics and equality, Sammy stood quietly for compassion, supporting the LGBTQ+ community not through loud declarations, but through kindness, empathy, and respect. The very values country music was built on: honesty, humanity, and forgiveness. Through his songs and his actions, Sammy Kershaw became a true American figure, a voice for working people, a reminder that no matter where you come from, you can still rise with nothing but your truth and your voice. In interviews and television specials, he is still called the last storyteller of old America, a man who never showed off, never pretended, just sang what he had lived. After more than 4 decades, he leaves behind more than music. He leaves behind spirit, a message to future generations. That country isn't in the sound, it's in the heart. When asked about his influence, he only smiled and said, "If someone listens to my music and feels a little lighter, then maybe I've done something good." And that, perhaps, is the greatest legacy of Sammy Kershaw. A simple life, lived with truth, leaving behind the image of an artist who never betrayed himself, and whose voice still echoes, softly, sincerely, through the heart of America. When the lights of Nashville finally faded, leaving only the quiet memories of a once brilliant era, Sammy Kershaw chose to return to where it had all begun, Kaplan, Louisiana. Not to run away, but to find himself again. In the late afternoons, Golden sunlight falls across the sugarcane fields. The breeze carries the scent of earth and wood smoke, and frogs hum softly from the bayou. On the porch of an old wooden house, a gray-haired man sits with his familiar guitar, plucking slow, low, honest notes, as if having a quiet conversation with time itself. After more than 4 decades on the road, he never once said the words goodbye to music. Because for Sammy, music was never a career. It was the reason he was still alive. Every song, every show, even if only a few dozen people were listening, was his way of saying thank you to life for letting him start over. Since 2016, he has toured across the American South, Louisiana, Texas, Tennessee, Mississippi. No more grand theaters, no more spotlights, just small-town fairs, honky-tonk bars, and makeshift stages where people still rise to sing along with him. They don't come for fame. They come because they grew up with that voice, a voice of truth, a voice for those who have fallen, but never given up. In 2017, he released Swamp Poppin', a blend of country and swamp pop, the soul of Louisiana itself. 3 years later, during the silence of the 2020 pandemic, he recorded The Route That I Took at Home, a raw confession about mistakes and the faith that remained. He said, "When the world goes quiet, I just need to sing, to remind myself I'm still alive." In 2022, he launched the Louisiana Soul Tour, not to promote his name, but to raise funds for families who'd lost everything to floods and hurricanes. No contracts, no press. He drove himself from town to town, guitar in hand, singing in churches and community halls, simply to make others smile. Beyond music, he devoted time to supporting orphaned children, veterans, and Louisiana's LGBTQ+ community. He said, "You can't sing about love if you don't know how to live it in real life." In 2024, he was inducted into the Louisiana Music Hall of Fame, not for record sales, but for what he'd done for the people and spirit of the South. At the ceremony, he said little, just whispered thank you and sang Haunted Heart. When the final note faded, the entire hall rose to its feet. No applause, just silence, because everyone there knew they were witnessing a man who had completed his journey. Now at 67, Sammy lives quietly in Kaplan. Mornings are for tending his garden, talking with neighbors. Evenings, he sits on his porch, singing to the wind and to the memories that never left. He needs no Nashville, no trophies, just his voice, his guitar, and a heart that still beats warm. When someone asked, "After all these years, do you have anything left to say to your fans?" he smiled, eyes distant, and said softly, "I used to sing to be heard. Now I sing to give thanks that I'm still alive." If you've ever listened to a Sammy Kershaw song, if you've ever found a piece of yourself in that raspy, aching voice, leave a comment, even just a single heart. Because sometimes